Oh,
Yeah,
we're
here we
live
are.
now.
We're live now.
Not
Good
live.
afternoon,
Oh,
good
right.
morning, good evening. Well,
And
you're
we'll see you
here.
all
Hello,
again next week.
Peppermint. You are. That's right. We tell them we finished. Peppermint's normally late. Yeah, we should tell them we finished. Yeah, well, here we are then. And really, all I want to talk about this time is electronic conspicuity and why on earth haven't we got it? And that's just back on the back of the thing in Australia, which is truly
What's
dreadful.
EQ? You put EQ in the description.
What's electronic conspicuity? It's what they
Why
call
is
it.
conspicuity spelt with a Q?
I don't know.
Conspicuity. It's better.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. They do. That's don't blame. Don't shoot the messenger. It's what the young people say. So it must be good. Yeah, no, that's what they call it. Yeah, the terrible incident in Australia. Obviously, they probably were fitted with ADS-B or some other form of alarm, but it was probably a Happy New Year to everyone that's saying hello. Hello, Mac. Hello, Anthony. Hello, Dan. But it was probably switched off, I should imagine. And one wonders also why there wasn't somebody on the ground, at least keeping a weather eye on flight operations, wherever they're happening, with some sort of handheld radio that couldn't scream. I don't know. Where am I?
Well, it was on a
misjudging
sandbar,
this?
wasn't it? They landed on a sandbar, so it's not likely to have anybody there. It's just a place I think they land so people can get out and walk around. It's not actually attached to the normal facilities.
But they were within sight. The sandbar was just off the heliport. It was just off it, and so that one had the one had departed, and it was right there. I don't know.
As I say, they need a visual observer for all GA. If as I've said before, if we need a visual observer, if I need to have a visual observer to legally fly this in my garden using FPV, why are we letting manned aircraft fly around with nobody in the passenger seat to keep an eye out for other manned aircraft?
Yeah, it's terrible. I've joked about it in the past that I need to put a ticker up like we used to have for the countdown to American regulations, a ticker up for but I won't do it because it's not very nice. But the GA fatalities, we've already had 5 in South Africa, and it is the 3rd of January 2023, and as you know, 4 people in Australia. So and that's not GA, I suppose, but that's 4.
Still manned aircraft.
Nine fatalities that without looking up I can even think of, and I'm sure there'll be many more around the world. But it does speak a little bit to Richard's corridors. I'm very glad that Richard's joined us from Altitude Angel and setting sensors up to detect mishaps in the air. And I suppose that would open up a whole different can of worms for you if you had to send a message to light aircraft to say, no, really, you do need to do something. I suppose there's no system in the world that can be guaranteed to get that sort of message through.
I think there's an interesting segue into Altitude Angel, but I appreciate the intro. I think our towers will obviously primarily be there to help support our drone users to fly beyond line of sight, right? So effectively replacing spotters and helping them segregate themselves from other air traffic. But it's kind of stands to reason, doesn't it, that because they're really good at spotting both electronically conspicuous and not electronically conspicuous crewed or manned aviation, that at some point they're likely to capture something which we would like to be able to do something about. And I don't really think that there's a precedent or a way that we could necessarily achieve that. So there's lots of discussions internally around, what do we do with that kind of information? How do we get it to the right people? But certainly one of the things that the towers do when they're in operation is to record everything effectively as a quote unquote a witness. So at least from an investigative perspective, there will be many, many sensors trained on the sky, some of which are optical, which will record, no doubt, what they see. And of course, we'll make that available to the relevant authorities should there be an incident. But it is just a shame, going back to your opening there, that it certainly seems, doesn't it, that electronic conspicuity would have will reduce the likelihood that pilots, flying around would have actually been able to be aware of each other's presence without necessarily being able to have visual line of sight. It's just a shame that didn't seem to be equipped.
Yeah, I don't know. I reckon they would have been, but they probably would have turned down all the alarms if they're flying in and out of a little helipad all day long. It would have just been off. So if that were the case,
that's a classic human factors point as well, right? I mean, we get asked this a lot on the UTM side. Why don't you guys show the location of all the planes in the vicinity? Well, the simple answer to that is 99.9% of them, whatever that percentage is high, aren't going to bother you. And if we showed you, you're more likely to take your eye off the ball, right? So we only want to show you something that you need to know about. And it's a really simple example, but there are loads. I think we've used the example before of a car dashboard, right? Imagine you're zooming down the motorway or the freeway late at night. It's pitch black outside the cabin. Everything's dark inside yours. You've got your speedo there. Then all of a sudden, all of the warning lights on your dashboard do a little disco. You're going to be distracted. And if you happen to be doing that just before a bend, you're going to crash. So, it's not having the information that's important. It's how you disseminate it that's important, and how you get it in front of someone just in the right nick of time. And, there's so much that we're doing here, which is kind of plotting new territory in that regard.
It's interesting you say that, Richard. It's a subject, actually, and I'm going to just mention something completely unrelated, but it is sort of related in the sense of there was a change to gas safe rules some years ago where engineers would come into people's houses and notify them of problems with their system, and you had to notify them of every problem, including something that could kill you. And it was actually found that by notifying of high risk and low risk, you were actually causing more problems. And now, if there's a high risk problem, you actually don't notify of the low risk, because it doesn't distract away from it. And as you say, it's about overloading information, and it's about making sure that you have the information you need, not necessarily the information you may want.
Yep, and I should point out that this is why I don't think the DJI AirSense system is any good. It alerts you whenever an aircraft comes in, regardless of how high it is and how, it is just a blunt tool that desensitizes people to itself. That's why I think it's a silly thing.
DJI AirSense has been horrendous since the day it came out. Everyone was like, oh, safety, safety, safety. I don't care about something that's at 5,000 feet. It just, why are you telling me? Why? I care if it's 1,000 feet or lower. I don't care if it's higher than that and it's going over me. What's the point of me knowing? Why do I need to know? It's just, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be filtered, all of it, obviously. But it's such a tragic incident, and it could have been avoided. But of course, we don't know the full story. We don't know what happened. But it's a terrible thing, and it just all the time my attention gets focused on my thoughts move to the fact that we're a digital sky we're operating in now. There's no reason why we should be using this duff old gear anymore. It's time to move on and get everybody in line.
Yeah, you'd think with a helicopter system like that, you would have a several levels in a TCAS system, like there is an aircraft approaching, and then you'd have a bubble around the craft. And if that bubble was breached, then all the alarms sound, and you've really got to do something rather than just having a general alert. We've got the technology to do it now, but if we're basing it on ADS-B, there's just not the resolution. It's just not possible. We need to update our systems, but airspace regulators are far too concerned about regulating toys to worry about these things.
Yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? That is the point, as you say. Visual observers for GA, please. If you need one to fly the tiny whoop in your garden, then why didn't GA have it? But anyway, all right. Maybe we'll return back around to this idea in a minute. I notice Ford have a patent issued for air corridors for delivery drones along roads. That's just been issued. Any thoughts on that, Richard? It's one of the things with patents is I never understand how Americans manage to patent everything. I never understand it or try and do it as if. Anyway, thoughts on that, Richard?
I'm sure it will land on our desk to have a look at some point. And just as we've seen with lots of other, I will assume similar patents, but wouldn't of course be so presumptuous as to assume anything more than that. But as we've done with many of these, we've had to put up a relatively robust challenge and to remind people that merely patenting an idea isn't something which generally tends to stand up particularly well in Europe. And look, there are these other things called prior art, which really ought to have been considered. But we do see, there's a huge proliferation of patents in the US, and I think as a company, we are the holders of a few and the holders of a few more patent applications, mainly from a defensibility point of view, right? I think what's really interesting is that it seems as though across the pond anyone can get one and anytime they try. I think it rather weakens the value of them a little bit.
Well, they're only a license to sue, and that's when you have the little guy who might be who wants to challenge one. If you don't have the lawyers and the bankroll to fund those lawyers, the guy with the most money always wins.
This is the problem, right? This is, I think, we've encountered in the company, particularly we were a little bit younger at the time, but we encountered our first patent troll probably 4 or 5 years ago, and have had a few others approach since. For those not familiar with that term, that's someone who's the holder of a patent that says that they've got some reason to believe that what you're doing infringes on their patent because, I don't know, they've seen a picture on your website or the wind blew a particular way, and then you have to defend that, right? And we've got a pretty robust way of dealing with that now, but overall, that kind of behavior has been quite prevalent in this industry, right? People saying that they've patented the idea of something that's got 4 rotor blades and flies, all the way through to deliveries. We'll just do deliveries by drone, right? That's patentable. The bit that really I get surprised about is there is this thing known as inventive step, and there has to be something which is truly remarkable about what you've done. And a number of the patents that we've been asked to look at that just seem to be missing that completely just really fascinates me. But as Bruce says, you have to defend that crap, right? And it costs you money as the little guy. And we've encountered at least one very large company that's wanted to introduce itself to us effectively by virtue of its patent portfolio, and wants to use that as a way kind of to date you. And it's akin to when you see movies on the TV and the teenager doesn't know what to do, he's feeling a little bit embarrassed, so he goes up to the girl he really likes and then punches her in the shoulder and says, "Oh, I really love you." That's a terrible way to start a conversation, but that seems to be what some of these big corporates do. So yeah, I haven't had a chance to read the Ford one yet because they've got lots of other more exciting things to do, but I'm sure at some point someone will ask us.
Yeah, I think the interesting part for me is not how dull it is. It's the talking of specific messaging as drones pass down the road, and the ability for one to relay messages is all stuff that exists. But it's just, I think to me, it's like, this is interesting. Why are you lining up these particular parts of the technology? Why do you think this is important? And
you see telcos have gone a little bit crazy on that in the US, particularly, of course, liking the idea of corridors and things like that because they've got lots of linear infrastructure. But of course, we have to remind them that, a bunch of radios on a UTM system, on a transit system, they're a bunch of radios. And then you have to go and point out all the differences in what it is that you're doing versus the one thing that they've managed to actually get a patent for, which invariably isn't what they're telling you the patent is for. But if anyone's ever had any time to read a patent, you have to have almost a degree in patentese to try and understand it. It is horrific, having gone through that process to write them. And, you start off explaining the concept and then it goes through an army of patent attorneys who turn it into something that no one can read anymore. It's quite bizarre. It's quite bizarre.
That's why they get the big money.
Yeah, well, it's a money pit for companies that invest in patents. Put it that way. But lots of big companies do that, right? They have armies of people churning these.
Sorry, Richard, but Ford's got a few drone patents kicking about. I was quite surprised to read them all. Seems
they
to
got
be
the blinky lights, haven't they? Did they have the blinky lights for remote ID?
Was it them?
I thought it was.
It was a car company, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I think that was the best one.
Yeah, because now that the guy from the ARC has got the patent on remote ID broadcast, I mean, seriously.
I think I saw a patent claim. I'm not sure if it was a granted patent, but I think I saw that a while ago. Someone who'd actually managed to get a patent for the very thing that had just become.
Yeah, he was on the committee. He was on the
committee. He was in the meeting. And he went out of the meeting and they went with his plan, so he went and patented it straight out of that meeting. I mean, that seems all right to me. It seems perfectly fine to do that.
It's corporate America.
Yeah, I mean, how can that be in any way troublesome or bothersome? I mean, seems like fair play to me.
The FAA will be headhunting him anytime now.
Well, very likely. Well, and interestingly, on the RID thing, I have got the RPAS safety reporting thing images ready to go. We'll show you them. We'll get. You haven't seen the images that we have mentioned that have recently been published by the CAA, Richard. You said because you're a busy man. So if I put them now, let's see if we get his genuine. Let's see if we get his genuine reaction to this. And I should have set
You
this.
put my poker face on right now.
Okay, place the poker face on. So there we are. This is in CAA RPAS Safety Reporting Project. So that's obviously that is a concern as formation flying with airliners. I don't think it should happen. I don't think it should be allowed. So
one of them aircraft's traveling very slowly, isn't it?
It's not that one. Look at the way it's tilted over. It must be going very quickly, and they're not a very good pilot because they're very good because they're flying.
They've still got the gear down.
Pointed. Yeah, but he's not flying with the skids in the direction of travel. So you must have the camera pointing at it. Now, where was one of those other ones? That man's. I don't know what he's doing. There's this one. So these are in a CAA document, and that has caused. I think this has caused. Where's the other one that made me think of Bruce? Where is it? Where is it? There it is. There we are. Look, they've been to Tokoroa and everything.
That's my plane.
Yeah. And yeah. Oh, there's your flights over linear infrastructure. That must be
That's a stock image. I think that's like an iStock photo type job.
Can't be a stock image.
I think we've seen something like that in the archives.
I think we've seen that one. I think we've seen them all.
Yeah, the one of the drone out the window is listed on Getty as well.
But it's also Shutterstock. I think it's also someone put up on Flickr or something. Like we don't really know where it came from originally.
Yeah.
It's someone seems to have acquired it and claimed rights to it, even though it was not actually published commercially.
What's crazy is, and there is another one, if you keep going, it'll tell you the number of operators, which is just a pure lie. The operator one just makes me laugh even more because it's just the sheer lies that they give. But whoever wrote this, I don't think has a Scooby-Doo. So whoever comes up with those kind of numbers.
Well,
this is the PwC report,
in 2018, Skies Without Limits. Yeah, that doesn't as yeah. I hadn't considered that at all. But as the CAA are the people in charge of running it all, you wouldn't think they'd have to quote Bryce Waterhouse, would you, for their numbers?
But what's really interesting, so those numbers, 2020, what does it show? I think it's in the next page. Is one.
Is that?
And it gets even. Oh no, it's not the next. There is one that's even worse, and it talks about number of operators, and they just can't get their numbers right. It's quite scary.
Mm.
It is the one that was up before. It's where they add together operators and flyer IDs to get their total number and that type of thing, isn't it? And it's
And
not only do they get the numbers wrong per year, but they put them in the following year rather than the correct year. So yes. 2021 is in as 2020 and so on down the chain. But those figures themselves are wrong as well. But they appear incorrectly in a different chronological order elsewhere.
Yeah, so
scary.
So that's the thing, Richard, that has upset the industry quite a bit. Hello there, Fiona. As you're going to CES, oh, good. You can tell us, well, maybe you can join us next week, or maybe you can join us from CES because you'll be on a similar timeline. Anyway, it's upset the drone community in the UK.
And then there's the price rises.
Yeah, that's also a little bit crazy, isn't it? In that there are, I can't remember the numbers now. I think there were 43,000 odd PPLs in the UK. They won't be experiencing any sort of price rise, and lots and lots and lots and lots of drone drivers. It just seems very, very unfair.
You've got paid for your value-added services you get for registering, right?
Oh, Please do explain them to us, Richard. What
I
value?
Find my
wished I
drone.
could. I wished I
Registry.
could.
Tell us.
There's the
Well,
Find My
we
Drone.
have
If your
that-
drone gets lost, people can track it back from the operator ID. It's that's worth
Providing the
gold.
sticker
That.
hasn't blown off. Yes.
We also get that
it's very
fantastic.
expensive, if I recall. That registration system was not cheap, right? And I think there are planned extensions to that, which are probably the reasons. I'm guessing, by the way, I don't know, but are probably the
planned
reasons.
extensions. Oh, are there? I wonder
So,
what were planned extensions.
Some of those
look
things
like then?
one might describe as materially missing, defective, parts from the original tender that are now being fixed. But that person would probably be a cynic.
Yeah. Oh, I see. And what
And
might
there's
need
only-
fixing then?
There's only so much you can do with a Raspberry Pi.
Wow, it's been
Quite.
very hard to get hold of. Very.
At least the
very hard to
Raspberry
get
Pi
hold
is internet connected, Bruce.
But it's 2 million quid they spent on that, wasn't it? On setting that.
2.1.
I feel like it was more, but yeah, I think the total tender value was more over time. But yeah, it's a lot for a spreadsheet, right? Which is effectively what the back end is, from our understanding. So I think we were very excited. I think back in the day when this was coming out, because we thought, hey, this is great because now we can improve our maps so that you can log in to the map with your kind of CAA ID, and if you've got some specific exemption or some specific permission that means actually a zone that's normally red on our map isn't red for you because you're allowed to go there, then that would be great. Turns out there's no API for it, so no one can integrate with this very expensive modern registration system.
Well, it gets even crazier, right? So I was somewhere at the weekend. I'm not going to say where I went to, but I was with a bunch of people and we were flying. And interestingly, what I was told was that if the police had come up to us and asked to see our operator IDs on our aircraft, we could ask them to leave the land we were on unless they had a warrant. They would have to come with a warrant, because if you're on private property and the police show up and say, we want to see your operator IDs, if you're on private land, if they don't have a warrant, you can ask them to leave. Then they have to come back with the warrant to look at your aircraft.
I wonder if that's true. I wonder
It
if
is.
that's true.
I don't know whether that's correct. Which
If you're on
what
private
legislation
land-
allows for that?
Yeah, but
No,
if they
you have an
suspect a
implied.
crime, if they all they'd have to do is suspect a crime, and
Yeah, I'm
that's
sure.
it.
I'm
And-
sure
Yeah, but
the
it did
word
legit-
is suspect
Yeah.
when they changed the rules. I'm
Because
sure it was suspect.
up to ask for operator ID, the benchmark is very, very low to ask for your operator ID part. It's a very low benchmark.
Well, I don't know. I was told.
There we are. Suspect.
Go on.
Callum's told us. I was sure suspect was the word, and I think Callum can also tell us that they can open the boot of your car now as well if they
Yes, well,
suspect.
please, yes. For a drone, yes,
Yeah.
they can.
have to hide
Which
all that
is
pornography.
bizarre. If you're flying a model plane, they could just say, "Open your boot."
Well, they've got to
Crazy.
suspect, and I mean,
There must be
They'd have
reasonable
to-
grounds for suspicion. That's the thing in a court
Yeah.
of law. There has to be reasonable grounds for suspicion.
I
mean-
would have a look at the specific powers, because with specifically for drone use, in terms of they only need to suspect that a drone flight has happened to establish that they're who the operator is and who the operator ID is. It's a lot more loose. I did a specific video on this with the MPCC guys, where they
But you
laid out every single stipulation and area, and they do actually have more rights over you as a drone operator than necessarily Joe Public that they bump into on the street. When you
But do you need an operator ID for a sub 250?
yes,
And that
For any
sure.
craft?
if it has a camera, so for instance, anything meaningful like the Mini 2 or anything upwards from there, that does require operator
But if
ID.
it was a camera that was used solely for navigation, you don't need one, do you?
Correct, yeah. Well,
Yeah. So just having a drone flight isn't enough, really, in my mind, to have suspicion that the law has been broken, because it could be a drone with a camera solely for navigation that's less than 250 grams.
yeah, there's specific wording for it within the police powers, which is why I made that video, so that everyone is aware of it and aware of the specific wording. It's very, very sided on getting the information, if that makes sense. But it's in there.
It's
come on,
recording.
Callum.
isn't it?
I've sent you the link, Callum. Join in and explain. Callum.
I seem to recall when these rules were mooted that everyone said this is outrageous. They're going to have all these extra powers.
I would disagree. I would disagree with Callum there, because they are obviously under the
Don't
new
join
police
in there,
powers.
Callum.
They're under the new police powers that were granted specifically for UAS. So I wouldn't want to cause confusion on that.
Yeah, because it was Air Traffic Management Act where they got all these extra powers, wasn't it? That was it, and that's where they got
Schedule
the
8 and Schedule 9. I think it is. It's all within my video. We actually went through with a couple of the people in policy at the police. We went through and we've put on the screen the specific schedule and the specific paragraph that each and every, because I wanted my audience to have a definitive, and other police officers, frankly, to have a definitive place to go to. And this is exactly what they can and cannot do. There was one slight error in it, in as far as obviously they can't necessarily ask for your ID if they're only checking the drone, because it's only an operator ID that's required. You don't have to prove that you've got a flyer ID to be flying one, so you could be flying someone else's aircraft. So there's a an oddity around that. But yes.
So an operator ID is the flyer ID. You need the sub 250. You need an operator ID.
Yeah, so it essentially comes back to the EASA thing on privacy. Was the only real reason why I believe that was for the sub 250 with a camera, because it's a recordable camera. Then therefore there's privacy issues. The flyer ID is 250 grams, is over 250 grams.
Let's be honest though. If you're going to argue with a copper, you're going to have problems. You are far better just saying, "Gents, how can I help?" I had that one where I had my collar lifted. I got the wording right this time, Gary. But and I waited for them to come, and they, the car pulled up, and I went, "Are you looking for a guy flying a drone?" And they went, "Yeah, where is he?" And I'm the guy flying the drone. I've waited for you.
You sound like an auditor now.
I've been expecting you, officer.
I've been expecting you, officer. Let me just get my shirt out. But yeah, no. If you're going to give him a load of hassle, he's going to give you a load of hassle. I found in my experience, having had to deal with them a few times, most of the time they were clueless. Most of the time they were super interested in what I was doing about it, not what was going on. And once they realized I clearly knew far more than they did, they were more interested in having a look at the equipment and going, "We've got one like that, but we're not allowed to use it," was the term, because we're not trained. But yeah, if you're going to turn around and say, "Get off this field," they're probably going to get a bit shitty with you very, very quickly.
Yeah, it's Schedule 9, paragraph 3, which says a constable may exercise the power confirmed within this paragraph in relation to a person if the constable has reasonable grounds for believing that a flight by an unmanned aircraft is taking place or has taken place, and that the pilot is or was the UAS operator of the unmanned aircraft to the flight. So he only has to believe that a flight took place and that you were, the person flying it to check.
So flying is a crime in itself.
I don't think that's what the law is saying. Right?
I don't think that's what it's saying. No, these are very specific, narrow powers.
Flying.
Yeah.
You've seen me.
I think the key there is some test of reasonableness there, right? But I bet you can't have that discussion with an officer in the field, so to speak. That's something which the court is going to determine.
Yes, which I did clarify in that same video. I said, what if you want to dispute? Presume I can't just say, "Hang on a minute, can we get the legislation out?" No, it's something that to be mopped up afterwards rather than to be argued at the time.
And the point Ian made, and I think Callum just reiterated there, I think in my own personal experience, well, I'm not a sort of commercial drone pilot, so I've been around pilots that are commercial drone pilots that have had interactions with the police, and I've been a wonderful witness to those discussions. But my own experience of police officers in general is most of them are quite helpful. They just kind of want to see what's going on. They're just trying to do a job, right? Same as us in many respects. But the only time I've ever seen problems cut up is when people start being quite nasty to those guys.
Yeah, I would say that's correct until it goes wrong, and perhaps I get more interactions with general public and flyers who are having issues with police, because obviously they're contacting me because I have lots of that type of content. But we had one recently which was also placed online as well from Staffordshire Police, which shows a PCSO giving out the wrong legislation. And this drone operator queried it, and the force have come back and said, actually, the service provided was acceptable because I would not expect the PCSO to know the CAA legislation verbatim. And in my opinion, the word he did use could be construed as the same by any reasonable person. So when you've got a review of what's happened and how that person's been approached over the drone flight, and they were using outdated vehicle or building 50-meter wording when approaching this pilot. When the police force themselves then review it and come back and say, actually, we think that service was acceptable, is an issue in terms of credibility. I
think the challenge as well is, right, I still think it's mad. I'm probably going to get shot for saying it, but hey, there's only just us here, right?
Yeah.
I still think it's mad that your average, and I don't mean this with any disrespect, but your average Bobby on the beat, quote unquote, is expected to police the air navigation order. Right? I think it's absolutely bonkers. You know, a lot of folks don't know every piece of legislation to the T, and you know, most police officers have got better things to do, right, than to stop a guy flying a drone. So they're not going to be experts in that piece of legislation. And they don't have any tools. They can't check. They can't verify. All they can do is use those powers that they've got as described, and then hope for the best most of the time.
God, do you know what? I think we need some sort of radio transmission system that a Bobby on the beat could take their smartphone and receive information about the position of the operator and the aircraft. If only we had that sort of a system.
I'm still trying to work out, though, what that power is useful for. I mean, it's just a genuine open question. I mean, if you suspect that there is some kind of airborne incident unfolding, all you can do is ground the pilot that's going to comply with you. You can't necessarily establish anything about the identity of the actual aircraft that might be causing the problem, right? You have no tools to verify that. And what we've seen, you know, as a company, we've been approached for information requests of an incident that happened, I don't know, let's just say in made up town. And then you get a request saying, can you show us all of the flight reports that you've received within a 30-mile radius of made up town? It's a bit of a broad overreach at that point, right? So I don't know what that does. I don't know what the officer is expecting to do at that point with that power, or what the authorities that gave them that power are expecting.
Well, the problem, one of the things is as well, though, something could happen now. So I've got I'm CA registered. All I need is something to happen nearby that a drone is in danger of someone. They'll come and knock on my door because I'm registered.
Yeah.
And they'll knock on everyone else's that's registered around here. They'll come and knock on our doors and ask us. They're not trying to find the guy that did it, because I don't know. Are
they not trying to do that there? I'm not trying to defend either party, but I'm kind of wondering if it was a gun crime, would you not, if you were an investigating officer, would you not hit up the database and just see if anyone's missing a gun that day? Like, I think I'd do that, right? I think that's reasonable, but how far do you do that? Like, I don't know. I don't shoot the messenger.
Richard is the law.
Well, Richard Ryan got his collar felt, didn't he?
Probably not the right guy.
That was a while ago now, though, wasn't it? We that was obviously around the Gatwick time, and these are new powers, and hopefully the correct deployment of these new powers will make for a fairer, simpler system that will.
And you've got that word reasonable, right?
And we have accountability as well. And exactly as Richard's saying, the officers that explained, the MPCC officers that explained these powers on my channel said, you have to remember this also comes down to being enforced. We're not sat in the hedges waiting for someone to, don their goggles and slap the slap the cuffs on. Often or not, it's if something goes wrong or if someone's made a complaint.
These aren't speeding cops after all, right? They're not traffic cops.
If it had these powers back in 2017 or 18 and wherever it was, they'd have caught that Gatwick drone flyer.
Yeah. Those rules would have made it so much easier to catch them.
They'd have caught him. They'd have caught him outright. Wouldn't have to waste time hunting down model helicopter pilots. They'd have just gone straight to him. Would all be safe.
I think this one from Chris is very interesting, and it always
I
always wonder as well. Yeah, because that has happened, hasn't it? That happened near Gatwick. Nothing to do with that incident, but somebody was flying commercially and they were ordered to land, and they landed in and re-kitted their airframe in the process. So it's not. So that's the incident that they caused, and I believe somewhere else, a policeman actually went to take control of someone else's UAS. So it's a fight. When do they become a pilot? when suddenly do they qualify to fly everyone's gear?
I wouldn't yield my controller to a police officer. You prove they can fly first. Before you touch my kit, prove you can fly. I wouldn't let them touch any of my kit.
It's hard to fly when you're tasered, bro.
If I take the controller, I wouldn't let them. I just wouldn't let them.
I think, but
maybe Richard Ryan one day.
No, I was actually waiting for my very noisy cat to leave via the cat flap, and I was giving her directions
to posh houses like that have a cat flap.
Because the cat flap.
I would have thought you'd have had someone. I would have
This
thought
isn't
in a
my
house
house.
like that, you'd have someone to open the door.
Help would do that.
Now, perhaps that's what she was complaining about. Perhaps that was the objection being raised.
Well, I wonder if Richard Ryan would come and talk to us about that one day and just let us, just give some legal opinion on that, because I can't imagine that it's risk-free for the police officer to do that. But I can't imagine that it's necessarily like a default, oh, it's the cop's fault.
Yeah,
the
advice we were given again during those different videos that we did with the police is that the police officers should give you reasonable time and space to land the aircraft safely.
I guess if they wrestle the control out of your hand,
that was their opinion on the night. So if they rugby tackle you and say
keep your eyes on my aircraft,
governor, then possibly they're overreaching.
If you expect legal advice from a lawyer on the internet, you're dreaming. They'll say, this is no way constitutes legal advice. They always have that disclaimer, so you won't get any legal advice.
Quite often, I think on a secret, when you get written legal advice, it comes with that disclaimer as well. So you're kind of like, well, I don't know anymore.
Yeah. Oh, but not Richard. Oh, GMI Visuals. Yeah. Richard is a homeless person near London, and we just let him on in order to it's like outreach. That's why we get Richard on.
I expect to see him on Auditing Britain's channel anytime now.
No, Richard's
as a homeless
of
person.
Altitude Angel, the only UTM that we approve of.
I have a question for Richard, actually. I have a question for Richard. Yeah. It's always bad news.
Shoot.
So no. Do you think this year the corridor will be fully up and working? What sort of time span? Are you going to be the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter? How's it looking for the corridor to be up and running of some sort of format? Straight in there.
The really important questions, the ones that really matter. I mean, we've got matters of jurisdiction and police interception powers, and then there's when's this corridor going operational? I love it. So in a nutshell, we are building the towers now. In fact, there is a warehouse cunningly located somewhere in the UK for secret reasons I shall not tell you, but it is in the beautiful region of English countryside. And we're constructing. It's beautiful. I said beautiful, and should have mentioned reasonably priced. So Somerset's out.
Oh, sorry.
We're currently building all of our control cabinets, which are effectively the smart bits that sit at the bottom of, I'll call it a tower. It doesn't always have to be a tower. It could be a building that we've deployed on. We've got the vast majority of all the primary components either on order or sat in the warehouse and due later this month, I'll say. I think that's when we get 80%, 90% of what we need. We've got a plan to build about 10 or 12 in the next 3 months. Just a couple of decision points left now on where those are finally going to be. But in total, there should be around 29 to 30 of these, 32 of these towers going in. Our plan is to have them all operational over the summer. But there is a difference between technically operational and ready for flight. And that is what we're working through with the CAA.
Yeah. Okay.
So I can say from an engineering standpoint, the towers will come online. They will go through a commissioning phase, each one individually. We will go through an evidence collection and gathering phase where we verify the operation of each tower according to some known specifications. That will include a number of drone flights in the vicinity of a tower at known distances. In some towers, it will likely include some sort of paid for private flights, effectively in different airframes at different and known distances, so we can calibrate and treble sure we can see everything. And then the plan, I think, is to get to a point where we're doing, and I can't remember off the top of my head, so please don't hold me to this, but I think the first sort of widespread flights begin next year, just after the wet season next year. So I think that was the last project plan I saw. I haven't got up to speed because it's my first day back in the office today.
And speaking of towers, guess who got a New Year's Honor Award here?
Your mayor.
The ex-mayor that destroyed our tower. She got an award for services to local politics or business or something. I'm thinking, my goodness, these honor things are just so rigged. You know, we'll give people awards for doing their job, and the people who really go out there and donate freely of their time and effort and sometimes money to help other people, they don't get a look in. It's such a rort.
Yeah. Chris Chris Clotford actually has got a use case for your towers, and I wanted to look back with him soon, actually, to find out if anything's happening in the Lancaster area, Morecambe Bay. That's what it's called, isn't it? So he's going to try and do some drone deliveries up there between the hospitals and cut the journey across the bay and all that sort of thing. So not quite a corridor, I suppose, or a tiny corridor, but I don't think your stuff's not going that far north at the moment, is it, Rich? Is it just up to like Birmingham?
I'm just looking at the map. No, it's not going that far north at the present time. But what I can say is in the next 24 hours, there should be some fairly exciting news landing, but it won't go all the way to Morecambe, sadly.
Well, what's a shame is, Richard, you've not. It's a shame you couldn't hook up with them and just put 2 towers in, to help for data collection with real world.
Yeah, I mean, what a lot of people don't know is that we actually have mobile towers right now. One of them is affectionately mounted in our van. It has a 24-meter
mounted in your van. You'd be sure about that.
On the van.
Mounted.
On the van.
Yeah, on the van. Oh, okay. Yeah, fair enough.
I should have said it's been welded robustly to the van,
yes.
and it travels up and down the country doing just that. You know, it's quite often parked up at some general aviation airfields that are very cooperative with us, helping us see what's going on, calibrate the camera systems, calibrate the radars and other sensors that we have. It's been out and done all sorts of drone jobs. I think it's off up to Coventry maybe this week, maybe next week. I can't remember when, to do some of the cool stuff that Skyfair are up to as well. So, you know, we're in evidence collection mode effectively. And when we say that, I think a lot of people think of evidence as something you present in court. And it's kind of, this is more serious than that. This is something you present to the CAA and a bunch of people that are looking to find out how you're substantiating that what you're doing is safe enough when you don't really know what they're expecting to see. So we're kind of taking a similar approach, which is let's collect as much as we can. Let's make it as realistic and deterministic, if you like, given a certain set of parameters. This is what it will do. And then we can present all of that to the CAA. And of course, we're doing this as part of a big consortium as well, right? We're very lucky to have folks in there like CPC who are, you know, experts on regulatory affairs and scientific evidence presentation, etc. So they're helping a lot with that too, along with other participants in the corridor. So hopefully we'll be able to convince our friends at the CAA that this is good enough to improve the situation, to get this nation airborne, doing all sorts of incredible life-saving jobs with drones, because that's what we can do with this technology, right? We just can't do it now.
It's going to be people are having problems hearing you, so just lean in a little bit, Richard.
Sorry.
It's all right. I think that what do I want to say? I want to say is air traffic navigation services will have a very good idea. A lot of them will be able to sit in a room and have an idea of what their air picture is that they can see. A lot of people at the CAA won't have a clue what air traffic navigation services can see. And I think you are going to perhaps be in the danger of, but I personally think it's a positive thing, of revealing just how much ATNS radars can't see. I think that's going to be your biggest problem, is you're going to expose a much bigger air picture than their minds can handle.
I think it'll be interesting once we publish some analytics, I think, you know, to show, and I assume can folks hear me okay now, by the way?
Well,
have I managed to
it is a bit on and off.
Oh no. Is this any better? No. If it doesn't work, I'll change microphones.
I think what you might need to do is click on settings on this actual browser. At the bottom there's a little settings wheel. Click on audio and untick automatically adjust mic volume and echo cancellation, because I think
how is that?
It's competing with your own inbuilt stuff as well.
I've done all of that, Sean. I'm now unechoed.
You're too loud now. Yeah.
Actually, could you turn it down a bit, please, Richard?
Okay, now I'm turning it down. Right, you guys are just jibing with the new guy, right? This has been nice. What were we talking about again?
Just how you're going to get a bigger air picture than.
Yeah, so what I was probably babbling into mute at that point was that I think it will be interesting when we release our first set of analytics, which we'll probably do after a couple of months of operation, and being able to thank you, Jason, and being able to give that back out to the CAA, I think will be helpful. But again, I mean, do the CAA need to know that? Does everyone in the CAA need to know that? Do they care about that? I don't know. But I think, what is going to be interesting is just how much activity there is. I remember maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we were doing we're having a lot of conversations with airports in the UK, but also some in Western Europe. And we were saying, do you know what's happening or in the vicinity, not, on the airport, but what's happening in the vicinity, sort of 3, 4, 5 miles around you? Most of them were very much adamant that there's just nothing flying around. There's no drones, there's only these aircraft. And we said, well, look, here's a heat map of all the activity that our users are just telling us that they're flying there. What are you guys planning to do about that? So a lot of these people want to come and fly closer. How are you going to welcome them? So that was a bit of an eye opener, and we do a lot of, we have a lot of that data available. But I think what's frustrating is that we have a lot of really good evidence and really good data, and people aren't approaching us to use it for better policy making, better regulations. We still see a lot of that is being made based on emotion quite often, and a bunch of people trying their absolute best to think through a problem, but without actually having the data. And I have to say, going back to what we saw at the start of the call, I think on the CAP document 2356, that's the kind of thing you see is people well-meaning and well-intentioned putting out these reports and then using really dumb imagery to conjure up some situation which is probably not actually happening. Classic case in point there is looking out the aircraft window and seeing a drone, right? It's probably not happening, and certainly not enough to have actually captured it in a high-res image and then put it in a CAA report. So I think, overall, the towers are going to represent a remarkable resource to help our regulators understand what's happening. And we would open that willingly and hope that implies some better, more appropriate, more permissive regulations based on fact, rather than, where everyone is right now, which is a bit of conjecture and a bit of knowledge, etc., all put together. Like I say, all well-intentioned, but data wins every time, right? And I think that's what we're hoping to get at. And I think one of the things we were asked about was, what is the likelihood that the towers will capture sort of ATM-style infringements, so air traffic on air traffic infringements? And I think there is genuinely some concern that the towers will see a lot of things that perhaps are accepted as norm when they are in fact probably quote unquote not to the procedure, not to the policy. But again, I guess like those police officers aren't sit there waiting in a bush. Our towers aren't sat there to try and catch out an air traffic controller. Far from it. They're there to help people go fly BVLOS automated without any human in the loop, right? So it's what people want to do with that data and how we give it to them as well.
I think if they start protesting and really don't want your services, I think if you can see my cursor, if you went between Booker, White Waltham and Elstree, Denham, and looked at that little bit of airspace there, I think you would see an awful lot of people cutting the corner here that they really don't know about at Heathrow. And stuff happening in Luton, sneaking in under here. I mean, there might be a big ridge here that if you fly low enough, it's a Chilterns. You can sneak in under the radar all the way up there, maybe, perhaps. But maybe people would do that sort of a thing. So I think, I think they'll be worried about the data you're going to
from our perspective, I think it highlights, what you're describing kind of highlights why you can't rely on any like one type of sensor, right? Some sensors have great strengths in certain areas and huge weaknesses in others. And that's why we layer so many of them together, which is why we always cringe a little bit when we see proposals or even draft regulation where you're reliant on one named sensor or one named broadcast, which is quite often, in our view, worse, right? Particularly, we've spoken many times on this program about ADSB and the seeming international desire to have a lot more of it, and at the same time then start to try and position some kind of regulatory regime around its use, and then expect somehow a reputable traffic management company to want to use it or to have to use it. Because again, if we don't trust it, it doesn't matter that you have it. You might as well not have it if no one can trust it, right? And I think that's the key issue, which is too often missed. A lot of existing ATM policies and procedures work on sort of trust and having walled gardens, the certain aircraft messaging networks or ATM messaging networks, which just work by virtue of the fact that you have to apply to get a connection to the network rather than any other inherent security. So if you happen to fudge that form somehow and get approved, you can see stuff you really ought not to. So that's got to be upgraded, right? It's got to be upgraded.
So how many aeroscopes have you got? Come on, Louis wants to know.
Some. You don't need that many to cover our corridor, but we do have some aeroscopes, and we have some more on order, just to be completely clear and transparent. We're aware of the fact that Aeroscope effectively has a couple of capabilities, one of which is to locate the operator. Guess which one we're not using? And guess why? Because we don't care where the operator is. And in fact, most often there won't be one on our corridor. The one that we're interested in is, are there any, potentially, is there any recreational users flying a Mavic nearby that our commercial aircraft that might be traveling reasonably fast, carrying a very important payload, need to know about so that they can be moved? So yeah, we have aeroscopes, and we'll be having some more aeroscopes as just one more layer of the onion, so to speak.
So is that like in the settings that said don't bother? You're not bothering to take that column in the spreadsheet?
It's like
operator's position, or is there
yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that it's more like the sensors on our towers are talking to some equipment in our towers, which effectively just do a little bit of processing and then relay that information up to our platform, right? To have some decisions made. Quite often, if those sensors are giving us information that we just don't want to use or we don't need, then we just drop it right at the gateway, so it never leaves the tower. And frankly, we want to do that, right? We don't want to be streaming data that we don't need, because that takes bandwidth away and takes power, etc., etc. So that a little bit of the limited pre-processing we do there is to work out what is it the sensor, or what language is the sensor speaking, and what data does our API expect, and it's doing the translation. So in the case of something like Aeroscope, it's just not bothering to transmit the operator location to us, because we don't plot it, we don't need it, nothing in our traffic algorithms need it, etc. So it just doesn't get passed on.
And was that because when I went to your event that you very kindly let me come to, you saw some DJI stuff flying. Was that Aeroscope involved in the loop in that?
I think what you saw, I'm trying to cast my mind back to all the various different sensor testing that we've done and all the things that we did, but I think actually the system that we had installed down at the Automated Skies event was the Drone Shield system from BT. Okay. And I think the detection that's, I'll have to go check, but I'm fairly certain it was a detection that was picked up by the Drone Shield system, which is another excellent sort of RF detection-based system.
And it's interesting that you guys knew, oh yeah, that's where a lot of hobby flyers go and fly, because there was I think it was a nice bit of canal or a nice bit of river or something.
Yeah, it's lovely down there.
But yeah, well, apparently in reading, so they fly up and down that bit. So you knew instantly. So, or you had an expectation of what that traffic was. I shouldn't say you knew exactly.
I think we knew. Exactly. I guess it's like when you publish on a map, you say on an aviation chart, you say this is an area of high intensity radio traffic. It doesn't mean it always is an area of high intensity radio traffic, for instance. We were aware that there are certain areas that hobbyists like to go, but on any given day, you could observe it and you'd see nothing. On any other day, you go there and there could be, 5 or 6 drone flights taking place in, the middle part of the day. I think we were actually lucky just on that day that happened, because it was nice to be able to tell the story that the corridor was adapting. Of course, for anyone that didn't know, and if you haven't seen it, there is a small clip of this in our teaser video that we did, but we were actually also buzzed quite legitimately on that day by an RAF Chinook, which was fantastic, right? Because this thing was not electronically conspicuous to us, and it was our detection systems that did everything that they ought to about 4.5 kilometers away at that point, and alerted our control staff, and also changed the flight plans of not yet departed aircraft, and returned those aircraft that were already airborne to its launch. So that was great to see, because it was something which we couldn't have planned for, and it's exactly that kind of demonstration you want to give people, particularly when you've got regulators in the room as well, because they need to know that the unplanned stuff, which is actually quite ordinary, isn't going to cause a greater safety incident. And did the Chinook? No, didn't care.
No,
just carried on.
I need to pad this out a little bit for folks that are hearing about this for the first time. Richard had an event in Reading in July, and there were several drones in the sky, all simulating different missions. One of them was flying quite a long way away, further down your corridor, wasn't it? The police interaction thing. So they're all happening within an area. And then if something came through, then they moved out the way automatically in an appropriate fashion. I think I'm right in saying automatically, with no person in the loop to do that.
There was a person in the loop, but the person in the loop was supervising just in case it didn't do what it needed to do. But yes, it was largely an automatic situation. As good description of it, Carrie. Thank you.
No, it was very cool, and the Chinook was, and I think for those of anyone that knows the recent UK political history, I think it had been moving quite an important person about that day, who was about to go into a new job. I think it was about that time that Boris was booted, wasn't it? That was I think it might have been operating to.
The towers are good, but they're not that good, Gary. They can't see aboard the aircraft.
No, I mean, far be it from me to have found that out. Anyway, but yes, it was a pretty amazing demonstration of just how it should be, and it does circle all the way back round to situational awareness in that terrible Australian accident situation. There should be. It's 2023 now. There should be many more ways of stopping that happening, apart from basic airmanship. There should be automatic means, and if all commercial flights, we don't need to have ADS-B out, but if all commercial flights start having, at least all commercial flights have ADS-B out, that's going to help the drone world keep out of their way. Even if DJI systems are a little bit lackluster and a little bit tricky, they can refine their software, they can change that. At least it's there to be heard. And of course, again, I'm beginning to see in the manned aviation forums a part of people saying, "Oh no, we shouldn't have electronic conspicuity. Oh no, shouldn't be forced on us. Shouldn't be." And yeah,
I've never understood that, but also at the same time, I kind of do understand that. But then it kind of reminds me of the old seatbelt arguments back in the day. You know, we don't need these seatbelt things. Well, everyone kind of agrees now that seatbelts are actually quite a cool thing, and they do save a lot of lives. I've just never understood the argument that I really want everyone to keep out of my way, but I don't want anyone to know where I am unless they physically eyeball me. And it's horrible to draw a parallel to it, but we've just seen what happens, right? If you don't eyeball someone in the airspace, and you really ought to have, or there should have been another system. It's just such a tragedy, isn't it? I think that's the thing that everyone gets upset about. Is this is avoidable with technology? Certainly avoidable with different procedures, but yes, technology can help solve a lot of problems, and it's always upsetting when you don't see it being used for the protection of life or for the enhancement of life, and that's what we saw in Australia, right?
Yeah,
but this technology is not always used. I mean, look how airline pilots push back against dash cams and airliners.
Yeah, it's just a shame. And flying drones with the scoop, that's exactly what happened. All the stuff that was tasked there was some big delivery drones. There was building inspections going on sort of repeatedly with a drone in the box solution that flew itself out the box and went around Richard's house. Richard lives in like Wayne Manor.
If only that was my house, Gary. It was the most incredible property.
Stately Wayne Manor. I was amazed. You didn't let me go into the back cave, though. I felt very disappointed about that.
No one goes in there.
No one goes in there, exactly. But yeah, there were lots of flights just continue. I don't know how many flights happened that day, but they happened continuously. There was a powered parachute. There was all sorts of things. And
lots of aircraft.
If a light aircraft, there's a little airfield just to the north, and that was just operating normally. None of these other manned aircraft knew that this was happening. In effect, there was no NOTAM for it, was there, Richard? There was no, or was there?
No, there's no NOTAM. There was no restricted airspace. It was all uncontrolled airspace, effectively. And that's part of the proposition for Arrow as well. Is right. Is its presence doesn't affect any other users of the airspace. It's the automated drones that want to use the airspace will yield to other users of the airspace. So there's no need to start considering things like temporary danger areas and other NOTAMs, etc.
And this is why Richard's system is so great, because it means you don't have to change airspace. Yasa's banging about use space and this, that, and the other BS. You actually eliminate all that, all airspace could stay the same. Manned aviation are used to, and they've got it in their muscle memory. It would be absolutely great because you don't have to change airspace. They don't suddenly have to adjust their thinking for anything. They've always been used to the airspace being class G at this level, that level, whatever. You don't change that, where all of a sudden, the likes of YARSA and RCAA, looking at airspace changes, it's just, yes, I am.
Well, that makes our fan count 1. Thank you so much.
But it means everything stays the same. It keeps it easy. It keeps it simple and keeps it clean. And if you can keep something simple and clean and easy, you don't put more process in the way. Because if you do that, as soon as you put more processes in the way, it gets complicated. And the CA caps have recently shown that, because they've just released all the new caps, and they, all the things that the regulator needs to double check have got mismatched everywhere, and it's a complete pig's ear. They're going to fix it, obviously, but it should never get to that level. And you eliminate that kind of problem, if you like.
Yeah, I think that the technology is a great solution, but the technology isn't the only part of that overall solution. Right? There's a whole kind of system of stuff, and there's a whole bunch of work that's going beyond the sort of the glitz and the glamour of the towers that goes into the procedures and how we're going to interface with people. But I think, the crux of what you're saying, I think, is that we've obviously designed this to help encourage and foster great, huge scalable drone operations without putting any burden on any other airspace user, right? And I think that's something which is often overlooked. You get lots of drone delivery companies, drone delivery trials, etc., going on where there's restricted airspace or other types of restrictions in place, or you can only fly one type of airframe, etc. Great thing about the Arrow Skyway system is you can fly any drone on it, right? Once you've satisfied the regulator that your drone is safe and that you are a qualified operator and you've got the safe heritage that you need, we're working with the CAA on that part of your operational safety case that allows you to delegate some part of your journey to AA. And that is a great time to put up that second question again, because I was going to get back to this. This is a question we get a lot, right? What happens if AA takes control of my drone and crashes it? Well, the answer to that is what do you think should happen, right? If we crash your drone, it's our fault, right? But it is a little bit more nuanced than that, on the basis that it's a common misconception that AA is controlling your drone. AA is not controlling your drone, right? 99% of the time, you're in control of your drone. If we can see something with our towers that would affect your flight path, we're going to tell you about it, right? And we're going to try and do that in a really automated way so that we can ultimately ask your flight control system to move your drone to this new location. If you do that and we cause a crash still, that's still our fault, right? If we tell you to move and you don't, or you don't do it right, and then you cause a crash, then that's probably your fault, right? But that's all still being tested. And, we are working with a lot of different legal folks, a lot of different statisticians to try and work out what should be the case. And then, of course, you've got what should be the right thing to do as well, right? It's not just what does the policy document say, but what's the expectation of your average person? Because I think that's always a good starting point for when you're thinking about how these things should work, So I come back to that critical point. What is it we think it should do? And that's where we're starting from. If we do something which is our fault, then we have to take liability for that. If you do something that is your fault, you have to take liability for that. That's nothing new, by the way, right? That's just the law, the basis for liability everywhere. But it gets really slightly more complicated, doesn't it, when you've got things like instructions and advice being issued. But there will certainly be a human in the loop in the earlier days on the Arrow Superhighway as we launch that into commercial operation next year, where you've got folks at Altitude Angel overseeing operations remotely. In other words, keeping tabs on what the system is doing, able to intervene if they need to. And then you've also got the operators, the people flying the delivery fleets. They're going to have their own software, their own systems, their own monitoring to decide what to do should Altitude Angel give them an instruction. And of course, behind all of that, you've got the towers witnessing everything that's going on in a completely transparent and uninterferable way, right? We have a technology which is very difficult really for anyone to interfere with, including Altitude Angel, so that things like footage are preserved. And I think that's really, really important because, we all have to be able to learn if there is an incident, and we never wanted to frustrate or change that process that is a good process in aviation incident management today.
That's a good question from Peppermint Pilot. What happens, as he says there, what if you recommend a diversion to a loiter area because of a threat, and that craft
Such a
doesn't
cool
have enough
question.
energy? Yeah. Do you actually require the craft to report their available status
Yes.
and things like that? Yeah.
Yes, we do. So there is, I guess you can call it a handshake. So before we agree to take control, take control is the wrong term, but before we agree to provide that flight service to you, you are declaring along with that initial request, if you like, your intended flight plan, excuse me, and then you're also declaring the capabilities of your aircraft, whether it's fixed wing or rotary, what your propulsion system is, what your maximum rate of turn is, etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of stuff that people probably don't think about going into it that goes into it, so that we know, for instance, whether or not the instruction we give you is likely to be something that you can carry out. So the most obvious example, excuse me, that we normally give of that is we're not going to tell the fixed wing aircraft to stop, right? Because it's no longer going to be flying at that point. So the system is going to have different instructions that it gives based on those variables. And over time, we're just going to add to that. So we're already looking at an iteration now where we become more aware of what the weather conditions are at each tower ahead of you. So we can decide whether or not we really ought to be advising you not maybe to complete that part of your flight or to change to a slightly more efficient route. So their efficiency is a key part of what the towers will be looking to do as well. So if we can get you from A to B safely, great. But if we can do it cheaply and we can do it in a way that allows you to get back and maybe do another flight as well, then that's a better thing, right, for commercial operators. So there's a lot that goes into it.
So it'll be all right. Everything all right. You'll be all right on the night. No, it's lots of consideration. So if you're going to operate in the corridor, you've got a task in mind. And similarly, you can fly your model aircraft under this corridor, and you're not going to be affected. You can fly as a phantom user or whatever. That's a bit old-fashioned. You don't say phantom anymore. Whatever the current one is, but you can report. You could choose to report that you're operating, couldn't you?
You can choose to report, and nothing is going to stop. So anyone that's using any of our products, APIs to report flights today, we get hundreds of thousands of those a month now, which is great. You can still do that, right? And all that the system is going to be updated to do, especially when our new apps launch as well, it's going to be telling you that, just to let you know, you're in an area of highly active drone operations. So be on the lookout, guys, because you need to be very clear that you can see what's coming. We obviously have additional services that are coming online that will enable people to be able to be alerted to the presence of our aircraft, going up and down the network. But that brings other challenges as well, because obviously we can alert you, but we can't necessarily know that you got the alert. So unless you're participating with AA, that's always a little bit of a challenge. And no one is required to tell us that they're flying, which is the other reason why the towers detect. So you can report if you like, and loads of people do, and we're really, really thankful for that because everyone benefits from that. We share those flight reports back with everyone else as well. So I don't know if Ian's flying somewhere up in Bedfordshire and he decides that he's going to report his flight. Anyone else that wants to fly there at that time is going to see that flight report as well. So he really is helping everyone when he does that. But yes, the towers are great in that respect, because we tried to explain to people the other day, what happens if you walk out onto a motorway today, right? It's usually one of two things. One, you get run over, or two, the traffic stops, right? But the third thing that the corridor does, which the highways don't, is that the corridor will move traffic around you, right? So imagine walking out into the motorway and all the lanes of the motorway warp around you just so that everyone else can crack on and you can carry on. That's exactly what the corridor does. So if you pop
Imagine having a footpath instead, it saves all that problem.
Exactly. Just get on your bike, Bruce. That's the way forward. But that's the concept here, right? Is that we have sufficient lateral and vertical space to be able to move people out of harm's way or out of the way of someone else who is perfectly entitled to be there, flying legally, doing exactly what they want to do, flying, with all the relevant permissions. The corridor is just going to bend and flex out of their way effectively autonomously. And no one is the wiser except for the company operating the BVLOS flight, right? They're going to obviously have seen that. They're going to have the revised flight plans. They're going to get potentially revised arrival times. Hopefully not, if we can avoid that. So it's all pretty I guess it's a little bit further along than people anticipate.
So how are
I
Google
just-
and Amazon supposed to make money with a UTM if you're going to throw a system like this in the mix? You're very unfair to them.
I'm really sorry to all the people with patents on delivering stuff. I think it's an interesting concept. I think we're obviously super keen on the Arrow model, and we're taking that actually out to the Netherlands and to a few other countries this year, which we're really excited about. But I'm sure there are others, and I'm sure there are other systems that will come on board. But we always go back to, hey, one thing that we're most proud of with Arrow is it doesn't require any specific change. Everyone can just kind of crack on. No one is excluded, right? And that also extends to people that want to use the Arrow service. So if you want to build a drone that has never been seen before in the world, and you want to build it from your bedroom and you want to put it into the Arrow corridor, then providing you satisfy all of the other CAA requirements that exist, we'll take your drone and fly it down the corridor for you. There is a commissioning phase where we verify that you've actually done the software implementation correctly, and that's mainly for your sake. It's quote unquote for the person flying. You need to know that you've done the integration correctly before we give you the service. But beyond that, it's anyone can come and play. And we haven't seen that with these other systems. You know, some of them you have to have very expensive airframes from specific manufacturers, flown in a specific way. Arrow's very different.
This is all just $9.95 a month per user. This is amazing.
What's gonna
Very
be
cheap,
interesting-
Bruce.
What I cannot wait for, and I hope this appears, is a PDRA to use this corridor. That's what we need.
I would love that too.
Yeah.
I think we've had lots of really cool discussions, actually. I'm really thankful for the open discussions we've had with the CAA at all different levels. And so many people are solutionizing and coming up with ideas, and PDRAs are one idea. I think it sounds like a great idea, but I'm not a policy expert, right? I'm not a regulatory person. And we've got safety and risk and policy experts looking at it now, and we'll be looking at it consistently throughout Skyway. But, you know, I don't know what the right answer is just yet, but I think from our perspective, the right answer for us is one that minimizes effort, excuse me, for everyone, especially the drone pilot, right? Because one of the key reasons we've invested so much in this technology and is taking away such a significant barrier of entry to people like the health services, or, you know, let's say, or a pizza delivery or whatever it's going to be. It doesn't matter. But if you've got a cool idea, why can't you just use the airspace in a safe way? The same way that you can hire a taxi today. And one of the things that's close to my heart is you've got, you know, taxi companies, private hire taxi companies, that the same ones that you and I can get, that will charge the NHS, you know, 10, 12 times for the same journey, you know, will take 10, 12 times as much for the same journey just to take a pathology lab sample. That doesn't seem right, does it? So, you know, drones can fix some of that stuff. I saw something about a bag of squirrels, Gary, but I can't remember what the question was. So can you, what was that one?
Can we report flying bags of squirrels? Yeah, I mean,
You can.
Yeah,
I mean, just to be really clear, you can. I mean, we have some limits in what the system will accept as plausible. So you can't really, you know, file a detailed flight plan with us that exceeds the speed of light, for instance, because our system's going to go, don't be silly.
Or even flying without crashing.
Indeed. But if you're coming, I guess you're coming into our tactical and our surveillance services, which are probably the things you don't see on Drone Safety Map or in our apps, because they're services that our professional sort of integrators will use. And certainly when Arrow comes online, it's when we're sorting out flight plans and changing them. You can submit that flight plan and we will try and service that flight plan for you. But there are all sorts of other limitations that we then put in. So, you know, you can't just reserve a chunk of the airspace because you got there first, mate. It doesn't work that way.
I know. I should point out for those. Oh, it doesn't work. Doesn't you can't see it. But am I to think then that the apps are changing? So if I say Guardian now, it's going to be something else next week or something. But anyway, it's free. It doesn't cost you anything to put that flight up, and it's not like remote ID. This is a voluntary thing. So I just do now, just because I do sometimes when I fly. I did when I was in the UK. You just file a flight plan and let other airspace. You don't. Doesn't mean you own the air, but it just means other people are aware of what's happening, and that costs.
I prefer not to incriminate myself.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, you don't have to, and it's not a precise.
No, and that's also by design, right? And when we were sharing flight plans, I remember the discussion sort of 8 years ago. We didn't want to share the live telemetry of a drone pilot, like some of our, I guess, competitors that aren't around anymore, but were at the time, we're trying to do, right? Because again, it's not a necessary thing, and it presents all sorts of ethical, legal, privacy, security concerns quite often. So the system, even when it's tracking Arrow vehicles, doesn't yield the location of other vehicles to others. And for some customers of ours, it's a competitive thing as well, right? Delivery company A that's competing with delivery company B doesn't want delivery company B to know where all of its flights and customers are. So, we take, I think I said it before on this program years ago, we take privacy probably way more seriously than we should as a startup, effectively, as a young company, right? As we've seen big enterprises care less about privacy than us.
Could you not give away the name of my delivery company, please? Thank you.
Could I not give it away?
Yeah, it took me ages to come up with Delivery Drones B. Thank you very much.
Sorry, that was my privacy infringement of the year, and it's only the 3rd of January.
In response to Jason's question, yes, you can ask.
Oh dear, sorry, Jason. You've been here before, Jason.
You've seen this.
Sorry, I'm very sorry.
Join Bruce's Patreon for the answer.
Yeah, that's right. Answers for what is your opinion of it then, Bruce?
I think it's a brilliant idea. My real concerns are that it's going to be very difficult because it's a good idea and there's not a potential for large corporates to make a lot of money out of this. It's going to be hard to slot it in because, as we've seen over many years now, it's all driven by who's going to make some money out of this thing. We've got companies lining up to become the next big UTM and control everything. We've got the FAA in the US wanting to push in networked remote ID, so there's a mechanism for doing that. Whereas Richard's solution comes in, it's far more elegant, far more simple. It doesn't place a burden on the recreational drone hobby. He's going to have trouble getting it into places where money drives decisions.
Could you tell us what you really think?
You're not lobbying enough. You've got to put more money into lobbying, Richard, to get this through. If you've got loads of money, big pile of it, and you go to a lobbyist, right? That's how you do
I
it.
tend to agree. You know that
It's VHS versus Betamax. It's VHS versus Betamax. Betamax was a better format, but VHS won because it had the backing of corporations.
Although we do have one other factor here, that if this actually works, which I believe it will, the other bits and pieces, no matter how loud they shout, if they can't get it working, if they can't prove it under trial, it doesn't really matter. So let's all hope, and let's all hope that this one is the only one that works. Frankly.
I would like to agree with Sean. I would love to agree with you, Sean, but we've seen the UK government. And just because something doesn't work doesn't mean they won't implement it instead of the one.
Yeah, although a UTM not working is a little bit more obvious than other things not working, like CAP documents or something else. No. I'm not talking about CAP. If the UTM system itself doesn't work, then that's much more obvious.
Well, we've seen that see and avoid doesn't work, but we're not changing that.
I agree, but if you've seen the way even the DFT works. Forget the CAA completely. Forget about the CAP error. That's just a minor thing compared to choosing the wrong system. The UK is very good at pouring money down the wrong system. We are very good at that.
Future flight. Anyway, sorry, a bit of a cough there.
Here in New Zealand,
thank you all for the support, by the way.
I've spoken about Richard's system in glowing terms with our CAA and so forth, but CAA are pushing their own, through AirShare, their own UTM system that's going to be developed here in New Zealand that's going to change the world. Everyone's got a finger in a UTM pie. It's very hard to get in an alternative option when they're not going to make any money out of it.
There's on that note, I should just say as well, I won't name the ANSP, but I'm sure it will become evident in the next 3 to 4 months. But we were told that we couldn't come and do some important demonstrations for Arrow in a particular country in effectively state-funded airspace on the grounds that the ANSP viewed our technology as competitive with them. So we just wanted to use the airspace, right, in accordance with the law, but we were told we would get no support from the state-funded ANSP because of the fact they're developing a competing solution.
So it's not about what's safest, what's best, it's about money.
Well, yes, but I think the broader aspect there, which kind of shocked us, was, hang on a second, you're a state-funded service for everyone. You shouldn't be competing. Why are you developing technology? You provide a traffic management service. So I think we see this a lot. I think it's okay to have the opinion that you're developing competing technologies, but also it just happened to be factually wrong, which was also really irksome. Anyone that knows me knows that I just don't like it when people are wrong and tell you that they're right and just won't listen, right? They just won't listen. Everyone gets stuff wrong. I get that. And I do that a lot and I try and listen. But when other people, especially people with power, are saying no to something because they're funding something which they view as competitive, I find that particularly irksome, and I worry about that. I see that a relative amount. On the lobbying side, you're right. We could probably invest billions in lobbying, and in certain countries more than others, that kind of stuff works. But we've seen it here in the UK. Politicians you can't lobby, but you can lobby their advisors, for instance, and that worries me greatly too. So I think what will win here is common sense. I think it has to. And I think the second thing that helps tip the scales is kind of like the VHS and Betamax argument is adoption, right? It's not necessarily that one was better than the other. And as Bruce has pointed out, as we all know, Betamax was superior, but lost. And it lost because no one adopted it.
Does anyone here actually know the true reason VHS lost?
As a beta. No one wants to buy a beta, right? Everyone wants to wait for the final release.
Sean's correct. Porn was released onto VHS. And it absolutely destroyed Betamax at that point there, because Betamax, they were like, no, we're wholesome, we're good, we won't put anything bad onto tape.
And now Sean's got nothing to play his collection on.
Yeah.
What's interesting is
it's that time of night, isn't it?
So when Sony lost that fight and they bought out the Blu-ray, Sony swore they would never lose to the HD. So there was Blu-ray, and there was
DVD. Yeah, I remember that war.
And Sony said, and they were clear on this, it says, we will not lose this fight like we did the last one.
No, they cheated, that's why.
Yeah, they did.
They got all the studios to sign on board, and that's how they cheated it in the end. But
mini disc is going to be a big thing.
Yeah, they also included the Blu-ray
Mini-disc
player on the
was
PS3, didn't they, as a loss leader?
That helped
to
massively
make sure
drive
it didn't
adoption.
lose, basically.
Yeah.
Going completely off a tangent.
Right.
The other big difference, though, between one of the reasons why I get excited about the Altitude Angel thing, and Richard will openly say I do call out Altitude Angel when I see things that I don't like that they're doing as well. I've had some.
He does, trust me.
Some quite serious conversation with Richard over that kind of stuff. But actually, this feels like innovation. This feels like something's actually happening, and it's something that I can explain to any air user. It's something that I can explain simply to a recreational flyer with a Mini 3, to someone that wants to start, to Manor, if they want to come over and start having drone deliveries, etc. here, all the way up to RAF and to EasyJet, etc. It's something I can explain to every type of air user, and I cannot see the particularly negative impact it will have on their access to airspace, and that's why it excites me, because it's keeping the skies open, basically. And anything that does that, I think we need to gather the carts around it and keep Google and Wing and their pervasive systems well and truly out of the conversations.
Just why are they being allowed into those future flight meetings? I do not understand it.
Well, you see a lot of contract awards. You see a lot of interesting policy documents coming out. I think even in the CAT document you referenced earlier, you still see things like the discovery and synchronization service being there. Again, no one ever thinks to trace the etymology of those things all the way back to the companies that invented them and the reasons that they invented them. And quite often that isn't because they want transparency. It's because they either want control or they don't want anyone to know what they're up to. And that is a very different reason to enter this space, right? So I think I remember being in a European Union discussion years ago where a politician I shall not name, I remember at the time heard the notion that I think a particular online retail giant was proposing a certain band of airspace which should belong entirely to that retail giant. Well, I won't name it, but
it was Amazon.
I remember the politician being a little bit frustrated by that remark and saying, we're never going to trust a bookshop to run our sovereign airspace. And I kind of have to agree with that. They shouldn't trust any company to run the airspace, right? That's the purview of the CAA. It's a
Well,
purview of the
I was
state.
stood next to your famous naval air traffic control officer that you've got working for you. Oh no, sorry, RAF
General
RAF,
Binks,
General Binks, yeah, General Colonel Air Commanding
Flight
Binks.
Lieutenant
I was
Marshal
stood
Binks.
next to him when the woman from Amazon marched into Farnborough, into the tent, said, right, we're going to do this, put up the slides. And I didn't know Mr. Binks then. He didn't know me from a bar soap either. Both of us were tutting heavily. And that's quite something in England if people are tutting at you.
Did you almost write a letter of complaint as well? Stiffly worded.
Dear BBC, why, oh, why, oh, why? And she marched in and she said this, and she said some stuff about their operations that were happening, some things in America and some things in the UK. And I went up to her afterwards and I just said, and as they were sweeping out of the tent, I said, oh no, but I think you're wrong on the stuff you said about the UK there. I believe that this and this has happened. She said, no, we're not taking any questions, right? Yeah. And they went and they came, and they had just railroaded this tent in Farnborough, telling us that no, Amazon's going to own this bit of sky, and that's that. Thank you. Good day. It's extraordinary.
And their plans haven't changed.
It's this huge corporate mentality, though, right? Is we want to fly, and there is a problem, and we can't fly because this stuff's out of date. So we're just going to come in and we're just going to do it our way, and because we're a company designing it, we're going to get what we want. And I think that approach has been largely resisted quite well by aviation because it's not a sector that really embraces disruption, right? It doesn't like that. A bit like medical technologies, it doesn't really do disruption very well. There's lots of safeguards, and Silicon Valley hasn't done as well as I think as it would have hoped. So I think, what do they care about? They probably care about flying. They want to set up a new delivery channel. They want to dominate that particular distribution mechanism. But do they really want to organize the airspace? Should we let them? Are there better ways? Us as a company, for instance, as we've always said, we don't operate drones, right? We have no skin in that particular game. We don't operate medical services, drone delivery services. We never will. That's what our customers do. Our job is getting people into the sky and sorting that problem out. And it's a big problem and it's a tough one. And we've always been into those, regulatory discussions, said, well, you should check your commercial interests at the door at that point, right? When you're talking about something which affects the lives of millions of people, you shouldn't be able to say, oh, I'm Bob and I'm from Acme Corporation and I would like this, please. You just go in, you solve the problem, and then you walk away. And that's what my aspiration was 7 years ago. And I think I've just been gradually jaded over time when you see how it works in reality. But I think this is what the drone community can do to help. This is what the aviation community do to help, is speak, use the system, use the service, because ultimately what will win is the system which is being used, because traction will equal change, right? And at some point, a technology will become so popular and so prolific and so used, people will have to adapt to it. And I think that's a problem if it's not open, it's not adaptable, it's not in service of the community. But Arrow is, and it's got that backing. And I've got the best people in the world from a drone perspective here and a commentary perspective. And you've all got different perspectives. You've all challenged the Arrow concept in different ways. But I think by and large, count ourselves very, very lucky to have you guys supporting us and the wider community, because again, all we want to do is open the sky up. And we saw that question.
You could saved all that time by waiting until now and just going on that AI chat thing and asking it to write you some code.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, all those years. I'm interested because Richard has a hat in the ring. Do the CA are they still using a version of Guardian or whatever it was? And do you believe the CAA takes data from the app's position data and things, or maybe you can't tell us?
No, I can tell you 100% right now. The CAA take no data from our apps. That's something I quite happily stand up and attest to in a court of law. CAA and no other authority receives any information, direct or otherwise, from our apps. We have a process where an authority can request information, and to date, we have not served a request. We've received them, and we've rejected all of the requests that we received for all sorts of valid reasons. But no, there is no direct feed. Arguably, perhaps in some instances there should be. If we can prevent an incident. We remember having this discussion years ago with Nat saying, "Hey, if I could give you a magic internet cable with collisions that we were foreseeing, where would we plug it?" And everyone was like, "I don't know." So arguably, we're having those kind of discussions. And then, one of the things, as I said earlier on, I alluded to, is we have so much data available from an analytical perspective. Stuff that doesn't personally identify anyone, but tells you a different picture to what the narrative often says. And that, I think, is a goldmine, which is not in financial terms, but in terms of knowledge that's just not being explored. And I would love to find a way. I've spoken with the chief executive of the CAA before and said, look, please come and talk to us when you're making policy decisions, because we would like to help. But I think good intentions then filter down and get forgotten in the wider team, because they're not used to having access to this kind of resource. So we have to tell them, we have to remind people, and we need the community to remind people, and you have to keep using the service so that we can keep it relevant.
And it's worldwide. If you're in America, it's got LANC. It's got LANC in it as well. We have the authorization zones,
but we don't now do the authorizations themselves. We don't service the LANC requests, and that's because we haven't yet seen anything in the FAA Memorandum of Understanding that makes it a useful experience for anyone embedding it in a third-party app, right? You're still not allowed.
It's a decision you made yourself.
We just decided not to do it, right? We don't make money from drone operators, so there's no point us investing in creating a really nasty experience for people in the app, which is what it is, right? If you've ever used the embedded LANC system in another app, it's jarring and it's nasty. The concept is great. They just don't let you have an API to push the requests in and then check on the status, right? And they don't want to do that. They don't have a timetable to do that. So we said, okay, well, we're not going to bother to invest yet more money. It's hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of development effort to go through it. And we just said, well, we're not going to bother now. If you want to go and fly, go and use, I don't know, FAA before you fly, or whatever it is. Crack on. Nothing that you're doing with LANC is stopping any of what we need to do or what our community want to do. But be open with it, right? Create the APIs, give people access, let them build the tools they want to build. And that, by the way, includes our competitors, right? We're just frustrated in general that experience isn't open. So if you flip it and you go to someone like LVNL in the Netherlands, where we're the provider of UTM technology to the NSP, you can build an app. You can go ahead and you can file flight requests. There's no restriction to it. You can be one of our drone sort of logbook type customers who are funneling stuff through. So yes, you can use it anywhere. And that's what it should be. And you as an operator, when you're flying, you shouldn't care how you're getting that approval. In my view, it should just be done for you, right? Because why do you care? Why do you need to log into another system? Why do you need to go into another identity? Why do you need to set up another account? You've got one. Why not just use it? And that's why we ultimately just said, okay, we'll keep all the LANC authorization grids there, because that's important for telling our pilots where these zones are and what they need to do. But we're going to stop short of trying to embed this weird LANC interface into our software, because it's just nasty. It doesn't work.
I thought that's quite a revelation. I didn't realise that you'd.
Yeah. So you won't see us. You won't see us on that list anymore, because the FAA, I think, are unhappy that we didn't sign their MOU. But hats off to the FAA. They're way ahead of what everyone else was doing at the time. But for some reason, they have this nasty commercial restriction that stops people actually using the APIs. And we couldn't. Our customers want to integrate our software, and that meant that you couldn't be. I don't know. You couldn't be Sean's delivery company, right? Delivery company B. You couldn't use Sean's app natively to get a request via Altitude Angel. You would have to see Altitude Angel's interface slammed in your face, right? And we don't want that. We don't want our logo right there it's here on my lamp, but we don't want it in Sean's app, right? When he's built something, invested in it himself. So it was just not useful to us to continue that. So we keep our eye on it. When that changes, it's trivial for us to put the API back in. But until then, it's such a different experience to the rest of the world. We didn't bother with it.
I just thought I'd move in with Sean. I'm just sat off to one side of him, looking for his cat now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're both chasing the same cat.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Where else can I go? You see this thing? Oh, it's changed all the things. Yeah, well, that's a fantastic revelation. I'm distracting myself with my own background now. That's a wonderful, wonderful revelation from you there, Richard. Now, what else are we going to talk about now? We've spoken a lot of very interesting stuff as ever. with Richard and with
Did-
Sean.
did we speak about
Where's Bot
remote
Grinder?
ID?
Oh, Jeff. Hello, Jeff. How are you?
Where's Bot
Catalina
Grinder?
Island. Sorry, go on, Sean.
I was interested in Bruce's video on Rotor Riot and the fact that they've done that thing, which again all lawyers would tell you probably can't do, which is disclaim away all liability with about 3 lines of text on your website, where they say, actually, if you buy this in the USA, then it's up to you to make it remote ID compliant, which isn't really the ruling. And it's I think it's interesting because it feels like it's one of the very small dominoes that's starting to and then where does that stop? Because although they're quite a minor company in the grand scheme of things, they're quite a popular brand, and I think it will be interesting to see how many people follow suit in terms of saying, essentially, I feel like they're saying, come and enforce, and how are you going to enforce FAA? Come get us.
I don't think the FAA wants to enforce. I think they've got better things to do. I think they've got, and also, as I said in that video, this wasn't their idea. It was forced on them. So I think they don't have a lot of affinity to actually follow it through. But some people have said, oh, yes, but you can, like they sell video transmitters for FPV that are not legal to be used by anyone other than a ham. And so they've got a disclaimer and that protects them. But that didn't work for Hobby King, did it?
No,
but you've also now got a situation where you have, as we stand right now, something that you don't have to do, i.e. if you have an Avata, you have to have the remote ID update working, or you will get all sorts of errors back that could cause safety issues. But you don't actually have to have that yet, but you have to have it. And you have a manufacturer selling goods that should be remote ID compliant, which are not being enforced. So it's kind of it's literally the bus is going in the wrong direction at the moment. And so
it'll be interesting to see with the Chinese, because Rotor Riot's big problem is if enforcement hits them, you've got all of the Chinese importers and manufacturers who sell all of the FPV drones direct who aren't going to comply with this, and it's just going to end Rotor Riot in some ways like it did Hobby King, Bruce, and those
and FPV and all the other US-based manufacturers, so to speak, they're the ones. It's an anti-business measure. It's compromising the rights of the US manufacturers and empowering the Chinese ones. It's crazy.
What's Horizon then? Because look, they're the big one, aren't they? The big band and fly, from a plane point of view and stuff. What's Horizon then?
Their perspective is that this doesn't affect us until September this year. But they don't understand. I don't. Well, they choose not to understand.
Because you've also got the situation where the trust certificate isn't actively, although you have to have it, and it says it on all of the FAA stuff, it isn't actively enforced. And if you ask the FAA what will they do if someone doesn't have a trust, they do say it's currently we are advising people to get their trust certificate, but it's not actively enforced. So you've got things in place. It just frustrates me from a end user point of view, from a consumer point of view. Whenever you start creating confusion, whenever you start creating an uneven playing field, then you get safety issues. Then you get people that just say, do you know what, I'm not going to listen to any of this stuff, and they just carry on. And that's a shame, because actually we could do all of this in a far more sensible way, and at least keep everybody informed, at least be consistent with enforcement, and actually look at it beforehand. And because I'm sure there must have been conversations at the FAA saying, what do we do if the companies just don't decide to comply? And surely those remote ID, those FAA meetings would have said, actually, there's not much we can do without
because even
a few extra
DJ
million.
Even DJI is in violation now, because if you bought an Avata that was made after the 16th of September and you haven't updated your software, you are using a drone that's not remote ID compliant, but the regulation says you must have standard remote ID fitted, but it's not there until you do the update. So really, DJI are not fully compliant, and it's the manufacturer, not the reseller.
They could force the update on activation.
Yeah.
They can
So
get
why don't
around
they?
it.
I've been told on a general release from DJI, it's one of the last lines when they were answering me about something on the Mini 3, that there will be, beyond this September, there will be a minimum update reference that you have to be updated past for FCC drones to work, basically.
So they're going to force everyone to update to that version that has remote ID. That's going to pee a lot
US,
of people off even more.
Stroke FCC users will have to be at 1.7.1.
Or what they can do is they don't have to force it on existing users. And what they need to start getting clever at. It's really simple. If the drone isn't activated, then you have to update. That's it. They do not need to.
They will, but that's where the lawyers come in, because the lawyers will always protect their ultimate position. Because if they take that to the legal department and say, "Oh, you don't actually need it yet," they'll say, "No, just to cover us, let's have it in place now. We're not going to mess around with." It's the same as not allowing the extended battery in the UK because technically we could have had C labels still coming in, so they won't allow that battery to be openly sold by their network in the UK.
Yeah, because currently
they're protecting that position.
Yeah, you're not forced to update currently. You know, it whinges like buggery, but you're not forced to update. You can use it without updating. What caught a lot of people out with that update was it was very small print.
Yes,
was added remote ID capability, and then there was no explanation. But that also caught out DJI's own people, because their Facebook groups blew up, and the mods and admin team, they were like, we weren't expecting this either. China has just put it in, sent the firmware out, and boom, it's hit everyone.
Which seems to be the DJI way of the
which
last
is very
years,
DJI.
It really? So, yeah.
It's
We haven't seen anything from Autel. Nothing from Autel yet, though. Autel
haven't.
They're on the list, though, aren't they? Aren't they on the list?
Tomorrow. No, they're on the list. Yeah, Autel. It's in the Autel Sky app. You can activate RID. It's there. And the new machine comes out tomorrow at CES.
But once you've activated it, you must not be able to deactivate it, because it must not be easily defeated. It's going to be an interesting year for regulation, because this wedge is getting so wide now. People are starting to wake up and realize what's going on, albeit too late. And there's going to be a lot more pushback, which I'll be leading the charge. But I think a lot of people are going to suddenly realize, what have we got ourselves into?
Or what have we slept ourselves into, not got ourselves into? We've been moaning about this sort of thing for how long? How many years have we been doing this?
We've been telling everybody, but they're all, it's only $5. Don't worry.
Yeah, it's a great shame, isn't it? It really is. And there was a comment about having, if your aircraft was built before whatever, you don't need to have remote ID, but you will do from this coming September, won't you? Regardless of when your machine was built.
Yes, it's the manufacturers that have to be compliant now, and then the users from September.
Yeah, it was a terrible idea. It does absolutely nothing for flight safety, but it was to fill the back pocket of somebody who bought into
it's national security.
Company. It's
all about national security. That's the DoD and the DHS pushing it through national security, because we've seen so many drones, recreational multi-rotor drones, compromising national security.
And don't forget, there was a UTM that no longer exists. Well, I think it does in one form or another, but not as it intended to be. And it was their idea, basically. And they wanted to make the hardware. They bought into a company, a module manufacturer, but it didn't quite go their way, because DJI swung it towards using a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. But yeah.
It must be a lot of money now in making drones that won't have remote ID, making them for the nefarious bad actors. They'll want them. They want to lap them up.
Anthony's asking about the DJI Rubbish. ArduPilot already has a mod for remote ID, and you can put it into Mission Planner if you need it. It's there. There's a little ESP32 radio that's been approved and can be used for that. And that's using, is it Bluetooth 5? Someone help me with that.
I think Bluetooth. They're using, Interesting what Dan says there about the complicated rules. What we're trying to find out at the moment is what represents a DIY drone. What represents store-bought has to have standard remote ID, and what represents a drone that someone has constructed themselves. Because there's people saying, if it's bind and fly, or if it's you've got to add a battery, or you've got to put props on it, or you've got to add a receiver, then it's home built. And the the FAA's backed away a bit from their original assertion that it had to be largely home built, but they've got contradicting information in their advisory material. So just like the CAA contradict themselves in their caps, the FAA is contradicting itself in its advisory material. Again, proof that these regulations have got so out of control, even the regulators can't understand them and get them right.
Yeah, I suppose it's still just a nightmare, isn't it? A lot of this stuff. It's different areas of the hobby are beginning to understand the implications, as I say, of what we slept through.
What's a random question for all the tech people? What's the range of Bluetooth 5? I thought it was like 250 odd meters. It's not far, right?
Yeah, it can be up to 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers, depending on environment and antennas and noise floor and things like that. There is a long range version when you're broadcasting, as opposed to when you're doing a two-way communications.
And remember, because it. Sorry, go on, Sean.
About 800 feet is on one of the bits of because I've got some remote ID modules that I'm testing at the moment from a few different companies, Bluetooth 5 distance is circa 800 feet.
Yeah,
I think there's two modes though, isn't there? I think there's the I'd like to have a conversation with another Bluetooth device, which is much shorter, and then there's the I'm just going to broadcast. But I guess the bit that always fascinates me with these types of things as well is in the broadcast mode, there's no confirmation that anyone is listening or got it, or that the message was valid. So I guess the requirement is just that you have the device and switch it on, and that's it. So it really could, I guess, be read as just go spend some money on a device that may or may not improve things. Like, it just seems a bit weird, doesn't
But
it?
the rule says it must do self-diagnostics and work. You can't take off if it's not working. So how are you going to know?
Does that mean you have to go and stand a mile away and see if it receives your own signal? Like, I don't know how that works. I mean, other than the fact the blinky LEDs are on, is that good enough?
And as of September this year, it's the operator's responsibility to make sure it's working. So if you fly and it's not working, you're the one, in trouble.
Yes, well, I've heard that there are a few manufacturers of such hook-on devices, but I'm still trying to work out, because we've spoken to a few drone manufacturers who've just said, well, we'd really rather you didn't affix anything that you've built or bought to the hull of this aircraft, because then we're not going to give you any kind of warranty or any kind of support should it go wrong. So I don't know. I feel like the commercial...
Not a problem, because these modules will only go on pre-built drones that were built before September last year. So the warranty is probably expired by the time September this year comes around. So there's no problem there. You just stick it on, just nail it on, or use pop rivets, or whatever, glue.
Pop rivets. I love it. That should definitely not compromise the integrity of the hull in any way.
Well, yeah, I mean, that, as you said, it's a whole different kettle of ball games, isn't it? When you see where people go fit them straight over the top of the GPS.
I see a new market, a new opportunity: aviation twine for tying on your remote ID module, especially certified for.
Oh, that would be the non-attenuating ground plane generating high tensile strength, low weight string that you're now selling.
That's the stuff, mate. Hard to get.
With Patriot mode. There we go. That'll sell more.
Patriot mode.
Absolutely. High tensile strength. Oh, my voice is coming back to me from several seconds ago. Then, it was a crazy new world. So, what else have we seen before we go? Because we've been going for nearly 2 hours. That's terrible. Wow, 45. Going once, going twice. Dear viewers, wherever you are in the world, thank you very much for joining us. Richard, as ever, thank you very much for joining us and being
having me.
Candid, and Sean and Ian and Mark and that old bloke over there. No, where is he? Where is he? How come I can't point at him? Over there. Anyway, yes. Welcome to 2023. It's going to be an interesting one. We will see you again, 2100 GMT next week. Look after yourselves wherever you are in the world. Take care, everybody. Press this one button here